You are what you eat. That's what they say anyway. But it turns out there's much more to it than that. How about this? You are where you eat. You are who you eat with. You are who you eat in honour of. Bon appetit.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Hey, it's fantastic to have you with us on Signs of the Times Radio this week. I have with me on the phone from Melbourne, Pastor Justin Bone. How are you doing, Justin?
Good, thanks, Kent. How are you today?
Yeah, really well, thanks, mate. Now, Justin, you pastor two churches in the Melbourne metropolitan area. Where are those, just for our listeners who are in Victoria who know the area?
Well, I've got a church at Plenty Valley on Centenary Drive in Mill Park and a church at St Albans, West Point Church. Okay,
that's great. Well, that must keep you out of mischief.
They do, and we have a lot of fun there. We've got a lot of wonderful people, and we have good worship services, and we have good church lunches as well, Kent.
Okay, fantastic. That's you've done that very well, Justin. You've segued very well into our topic for today, because you wrote a great article for us in this month's Signs of the Times magazine, the April edition. You initially called it commensality, and I said, as the editor of the magazine, that's way too intellectual. Let's just call it eating together. Can you explain to me, is there a difference between commensality and eating together? How does that all work?
Well, I guess there's not. At the heart of it, commensality is eating at the same table, but it also carries this idea of a social connection that's provided by food. And it's something that we all understand instinctively, but maybe it's something that we've lost a little in our society today too.
Yeah, I guess, the advent of TV dinners and this sort of thing. I mean, TV dinners was sort of a 70s, 80s phenomenon, wasn't it? But now it's everyone takes their dinner to their room and watches their own screen. It's possibly even more disconnected than it's ever been in a family or a household.
Well, that's true. And also, I would suggest the rise of takeaway meals, where you can drive through and pick up a meal and eat it in your car without anyone else around you. There's a lot of options to eat solo these days. And so we do that. It's a fast-paced world. We're all busy people. And so sometimes we just don't have time to sit down and enjoy the interaction that comes with a proper meal.
Yeah, okay. So in your article, you point out a number of contexts in which actually eating together can be a really powerful thing. And you start right back in your childhood, which I guess, a lot of us would have sort of hopefully happy memories of sitting around the table with the family eating together. What's your story?
Well, you're right. That food when you're a kid as well, there's nothing like a home-cooked meal that mum makes you just for you and puts it down in front of you. But I was lucky in my family. My dad liked to cook as well. And I grew up in a far-flung town in New South Wales called Broken Hill.
Oh, yeah.
And we lived about half an hour out of Broken Hill, and there were some natural native bush fruits that grew there called quandongs.
Uh-huh.
And it's a strange little tart fruit that tastes a lot like rhubarb. But my father would basically harvest these, and he'd cook them up into a pie. And these pies became really well known in our little community. He didn't just feed us, but he would give them to friends and family, and he would take them to the local pub, and he would sell them to the pub, and they would give it to tourists who came because it was such a delicacy of food. And it was just a special day when he'd harvest these fruit, and he'd stew them up, put sugar in it, and he would make these pies. This is all the only thing that he cooked all year, Kent, was this lot of pies. And he would make this nice pastry, hand roll it himself, and he'd shake a little bit of sugar over the top, and it would come out of the oven brown and crusty. And I still remember how it tasted, cutting a slice of that pie and having this ice cold white cream on top of it as well. And even just thinking about it now, it takes me back to that moment, and brings up the connection not only with that food but also with my father.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. You remind me a little bit of my in-laws. You know, I married into a Hungarian family, and for them, you know, the food is so important, you know, in terms of, you know, where you've gone, who you've been with, whatever, but what did you eat is always the question, and it's the thing that connects people together. Wow, there you go. So Broken Hill, so iron ore and Kwandong pie were the tourist attractions. Is that how it worked back in the day?
Absolutely, and the kangaroos, of course, and the art, the brushman of the bush are out there. So,
okay, fantastic. So when you were sitting around the table with your family, what sorts of, you know, conversations happened that perhaps, you know, wouldn't have happened, you know, otherwise?
Well, you know, we as kids, of course, we wanted to go and sit in front of the television and eat our dinner there, but Mum wouldn't have any of it. We'd sit at the table. And it was one of those old country tables with the green laminate top.
Yep.
And she would grill us about our days. And so before we knew it, over a meal, we'd be sharing what had happened at school, the funny things that had occurred, or, you know, the harder parts of our day, and we'd be able to talk about them. And because it was not just a face-to-face grilling, because we were eating at the time, those sort of barriers were dropped. And it was just easier to share what had happened in our day.
Wow.
And I do that now with my own daughter when she gets home from school. She's always hungry, and I know that if we can start talking over a meal, she'll share more than she ever would have if I just tried to grill her.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. That can be really powerful. And you make the point in your article, Justin, that when it comes to, you know, rites of passage in our culture, it seems that there's a table, you know, with food on it, not far away on any of those occasions.
It's something that I noticed, especially, I guess, doing pastoral work, because you do a few funerals. But not only that, when you're young, when you're growing up, it was exciting to get together with family for a party. And there was always a huge table full of food. And I've got photos going back to me as a child every year with me next to this cake. And it would always be, my mum would say, what kind of cake do you want for your party this year? Mm-hmm. And there would be a special cake made. There'd be a big banquet. And that went on. And obviously the big one is your 18th. And for me, it was my 18th. And there's a huge party with food. Every time over Christmas or Easter, we'd have a special banquet, and all the family would come together. And at Christmas, we'd get 3 or 4 tables in a row all joined together, and there's 40 or 50 of us all around one table eating food together. There's food every time that we go and vote even.
Yes, the democracy sausage, they call it. Yeah,
the democracy sausage. It's our right to have a sanger when we go and vote, have a sausage. And even when you marry, if you've got someone being baptized or christened, there would be a meal there. Every major event, every major landmark of our lives is marked by food. And I noticed when I was pastoring, even every single funeral, most attention was given to the food. There's always a buffet at every major event in our lives, and I noticed that. And anyone who knows me knows I enjoy food. Yeah. And so I started noticing that it's more than just we want something to eat. Food is important. Something special and important is happening when we share food together.
Yeah, and you make the point in your article again that social isolation is a real problem in our society. I mean, you know, you mentioned people, you know, hitting the drive-through window and eating alone so often. I mean, what are the consequences of that? You know, like socially and even health-wise.
Oh, there are big consequences, and this is becoming a real problem in our society. And you would think, well, eating alone is fine, but what we're noticing, and many surveys and a lot of statistics will back this up, that Australia is very lonely, that we have a lot of lonely people in our culture. And a part of that is because we're not eating together anymore, but also people are living longer, and so family units are living separately. We've got an aging population who are more likely to live alone, especially after the death of a partner. And so you've got at least 1 in 10 Australians who are living alone.
Yeah, actually, I believe, Justin, that in the last census it was revealed that the fastest growing household type in Australia is actually people living alone. So it's an increasing demographic. Yeah, but sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're right. It is increasing. That's the difficulty. And you might think, well, that's fine. I like to live alone. But the problem is that we're losing the lack of social support. And when you go through a difficult time when you live alone, you start realizing how hard it could be. So, for example, you might live alone and all of a sudden your car will break down without some support or family or a friend to call to help you out. It's a difficult day.
Yeah.
And so if you're alone, you're more likely to lack social support. That's essential. But they also statistics show that being connected socially is better for our health. We're more likely to live longer if we have that social fabric in our lives.
And then I guess there are the mental health disorders that we're at risk of if we're living in those isolated circumstances. Depression and the like.
Absolutely, it can lead to an exacerbation of mental health issues, and of course there's numerous examples. And I've got a sister-in-law who works in the ambulance service, and she'll find someone who's fallen over, but they live alone. They're unable to get help or to get up because they're elderly. And so it's so important to have a social structure around us.
Yeah, and then you hear those really, awful stories about, the old lady next door, haven't seen her for a long time, and sort of, 3 months later, someone finally checks and discovers that, there she is. She's been dead for several weeks. People had sort of been wondering what the smell was. I mean, it's horrific. That sort of thing has happened more than once, and it does seem to be a symptom of a society that is increasingly, isolated.
Look, it really does happen more than we would think, especially in Australia. And there's a substantial amount of men and women. This isn't just for women or men. Report that they feel emotional loneliness, and sometimes for years at a time. Not just once on the weekend, but for multiple years they are feeling lonely and emotionally isolated. This isn't not good for us, for our society either.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that this whole idea of, the power of eating together is not something that, is just in Australian society or New Zealand society or, Western societies. It's something that seems to, track the world over. Wherever there are people, there's there's a meal to be had. Now, you travelled a little bit in the Middle East, and, Middle Eastern hospitality is, legendary. What were some of your experiences there?
Oh, look, I loved it over there. The food of another culture really tells you about that culture. There was a French gastronomist, Brillat Savarin, who said, "Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are." So when you see what somebody eats, when you eat what they eat, you come to a greater understanding of them and their culture. So in the Middle East, what you do is you eat the bread that they make, and it's unlike any bread that you've ever had before. And it opens your eyes to a different way of living, that there's a whole group of people who eat different bread from you. And it expands your horizons, it expands your mind, it expands your taste buds, definitely. And so when you go and you eat some of their food, and, for example, they have this extensive ritual sometimes around making their coffee. And they've got beautifully ornate, decorated containers for it, and they have a certain way of making it. And when they share this with you, it is not just sharing a drink, it's actually about hospitality.
Yeah.
And when we were on the tour bus through the Middle East and through the Sinai Peninsula, our tour group told us in particular that if someone was to offer you food or drink, you should not turn it down, because even if you're not hungry, you should say yes, because when you refuse their hospitality, you're refusing them. You're causing offense to them. And the only reason to refuse is because you don't trust them, you don't like them, you're at odds with them. Whereas when you eat together, you're saying we're friends, we've got nothing to hide, we trust each other.
Wow. So did that theory actually come true in your case? Did you find yourself invited to, to have a drink with someone or to share a meal with someone?
Oh, absolutely. And wherever we went around the Middle East, there would be local peoples, and we were lucky enough that there was a Bedouin tribe that we ran into. We were staying at the hotel, and there was some tents set up nearby from the local Bedouin tribe. And as you wander past, they're very friendly, and they'll bring you into their tents, and they'll share a hot drink with you. And so you say yes, and you don't want to refuse. And then all of a sudden, you've learned a bit more. You've sat in someone's home, you've seen how they live, and you've shared food and drink with them. And that brings you closer than anything else could possibly do. I think it creates a bond between you when you share food.
It must have been really powerful. I mean, these are nomadic people who are basically moving around, living in tents. I mean, a very, very different lifestyle, a very, very different culture from ours here in Australia. What was that like? Like sitting in a tent with someone who, I assume your Arabic isn't so crash hot, and sharing food.
I bought a phrase book, but it didn't help me much. But that's the amazing thing, because our clothes were different, the way we lived were different, the way we slept was different, the way we talked, we couldn't understand each other. But one thing was the same, was that we shared food and drink. And we could sit across from each other and have a shared human experience with that little cup. And that's all that it took.
Yeah.
And we understood each other in a way that we couldn't before.
Wow. No, that is really powerful. Now, you're a pastor, of course, there in Melbourne, Justin, and which means, I guess, you end up talking about Jesus a lot. So I imagine you must have put some thought into the way that Jesus lived his life when it comes to food and drink. I mean, as you say, you're a keen eater. You're developing this this theology of food by the sound of it. Call it commensality or whatever. It just means, hey, let's eat. How do you see food and meals and eating together playing a part in Jesus' life and ministry?
Look, food was very important in the Middle East when I was there, and that goes all the way back to Jesus' time and before him, of course.
Yeah.
Food was very important, and what I guess I noted when I read the Bible is that Jesus and his disciples ate a lot. From one of the very first miracles Jesus did at a wedding while they were at a wedding feast. And there was food when they ate. They would eat from the fields as they went along. Sharing food with each other was very important to them all the way through Jesus' life. But then particularly at the end when he started speaking about himself.
Well, just before we get to that, Justin, because I do want to spend some time looking at that Last Supper experience, but didn't Jesus spend a lot of time eating with, all sorts of different groups of people to the point that he was actually criticized for some of his associations and the sort of friends he chose to have? How do you see, food and eating together sort of, being a part of that story?
That's a really good point that you bring up, because they knew that eating with someone meant something. They knew that sharing food with someone put them on an equal social footing. So when Jesus would eat with someone, and so, for example, the story that most people may have heard of is Zacchaeus. Yeah, he's this fellow who's a social outcast. Yeah, he's a tax collector, and he's lonely. He's one of these people experiencing this loneliness. But when Jesus sees him, he calls him down and says, "I'm going to go to your house for lunch today. I'm going to eat with you." Yeah. It's a way of redefining social boundaries. And that's something that we can access, something that we can do. There are people in our society that maybe some others would not like to eat with, but maybe that's something that we could do the way that Jesus did. Wow,
yeah. So, I mean, we see, Jesus eating, as you say, with a social outcast like Zacchaeus. I mean, he was like a collaborator with the Roman regime that was, occupying the land and oppressing him. So that's a pretty big deal. That's actually a political statement, eating with that guy. And then you have Jesus eating with, Pharisees, the religious leaders. They're very respectable people. But then you also have Jesus being criticized. Sometimes some of these Pharisees came to to Jesus' followers and says, "What's the deal, with your rabbi? He associates with sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors and all this sort of stuff." It seemed to be actually quite controversial, a little bit of a scandal. He was called a glutton and a drunkard because of these associations, because of these behaviors.
Look, and that's the remarkable thing about Jesus. He transcended these cultural taboos. He he talked with people that he wasn't supposed to talk with. He spoke with Samaritans, and he would forgive women who supposedly had been caught in adultery. He helps people that the culture at the time said those people should be avoided. And so he didn't let the social status or cultural expectations dictate how he treated people. So yeah, he really transcended those, and he spent time particularly with the outcasts. And he loved people no matter where they came from. And the Pharisees didn't like it. When you do that sort of thing, you cause a reaction. Something as simple as eating a meal with someone can cause a big reaction.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Justin. So now, sorry, I did divert you from where you were headed, which is to talk about Jesus and the Last Supper, and I guess even those of us who don't have a lot of biblical background have maybe seen the Da Vinci Code or whatever, and or seen that Leonardo da Vinci painting of Jesus and his disciples having that Last Supper. Can you explain that, like the significance of that meal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's become so important that we've given it a title, The Last Supper, because it's the last meal that Jesus shared with his disciples. And at its heart, Jesus was sitting down and sharing food and drink with these people that he'd spent years with on the road. But more than that, he knew the importance of what he was doing, and there was a symbol behind the bread and the wine that he shared. And he'd spoken about that before in his teachings. He said, I am the bread of life. So calling yourself bread is a staple food. Bread is what people used to be paid in, or people would have every day. It was their basic meal. They didn't have the options that we have today.
Yeah.
They didn't have the supermarkets to drop into. They had their bread.
Yep.
And so Jesus, he says, I'm like this bread. You need me every day.
So not a fancy extra, not a sort of a foodie, extravagant extra ingredient. This is he's saying, I'm a staple. I'm the staple of life, the foundation of your life, in the same way that bread is a foundation of every meal at that time.
Absolutely. This is something that everyone can afford, that everyone can eat. This isn't. He's not calling himself Smashed Avo at a local cafe that costs you $17.
Yeah,
he's saying I'm the basic Wonder Bread for $1, or I'm the basic loaf of bread for $1 that you buy. The very basic and simple food that everyone can afford to eat. That's what he's comparing himself to. Something that everyone is used to eating, because everyone has access to that food. And he's doing that. He's calling himself that because from then on, every time anyone sat down and ate bread, they would think of Jesus.
Yeah. And he even prayed, didn't he? In the Lord's Prayer, he said, give us this day our daily bread. And this seems to be, I guess, this reinforces the message that for that time in that culture, and in a lot of places today, bread is on the table just about every meal. I mean, I remember going to Europe, when I was a teenager to Poland, and it was the case that there was bread on the table at every meal. It wasn't a meal without it. So I guess Jesus is saying in that sense, hey, if I'm going to be the bread in your life, it means I want to be daily a part of your life. I want you to consider me every day. I want you to connect with me every day. Just in the same way that bread is a part of every meal.
I used to visit my aunt, and whenever I'd see her, her table always had a loaf of bread and butter in one of those little dishes on it. Yep. So at the very least, you can sit down and eat a piece of bread and have some butter. So that tradition that goes back thousands of years. But also he's saying that bread, it's a simple thing in life. Yeah. He's also kind of saying we don't need to chase the expensive gourmet things in life. That it's enough to be satisfied with the simple things, the simple bread.
Yeah, sure. And but also he attached symbolism to like the bread and also the wine that he shared, which was another staple on the table as well. What did he mean by those things, the bread and the wine?
Well, look, he does an amazing thing, doesn't he? He turns a simple meal into a picture of what he's done for us. And so he took the bread and he compared it to his body said, I'm the bread of life, but then we saw that he broke the bread at this meal. And so he was kind of saying, my body's about to be broken. Yeah. And that's what happened on the cross. Yep. And he took the wine and he said, this is my blood. And then he poured it out to them. And he said, this is my blood. And so when we see him die on the cross and his blood is poured out from his side as he dies. And so he's saying, this is me. These broken things, they're representing me. And so when we share the bread and the wine together as a community, we're sharing him. And we're united not just by the food that we eat together, but we're united by the fact that we're all joined to Jesus. It's commensality.
Yeah, wow. And I guess if our listeners want to check out some of the details and some of the biblical background of that, either grab the magazine, the April edition of Signs of the Times, or jump on our website, which is signsofthetimes.org.au, and check out Justin's article, Eating Together. And there are some Bible texts there that sort of show that tell this story from the different Gospels, and also go on to show how in the New Testament the early Christians continued in this ritual of breaking bread and drinking wine together to remember Jesus. It's become a pretty foundational part of the Christian experience and of Christian worship, hasn't it?
Look, that tradition continues today in every Christian church that I've ever been to. They will have this supper. They will eat together, and we're still remembering that last meal that Jesus shared by sharing a meal with each other today.
Wow, no, that's really powerful. Hey, thanks so much, Justin, for writing that article for us and for discussing it with us today. But look, before you finish up, you've got something exciting coming up in May, I believe, in Melbourne, in the Victorian area. That's the Revelation Today series, a series of public meetings. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, I'd love to, Kent. Yes, Revelation Today is a series coming up in May. It starts May the 3rd and 4th. Now, we're across 4 different venues. We've got one in Dandenong, one in South Morang, one in Taylors Hill, and one in Box Hill. And we've got a couple of amazing speakers coming from America, John Bradshaw and Eric Flickinger. And they're going to share some exciting stories and some talks about this kind of topic. And we're very excited about that. There's afternoon and evening meetings. And if you're interested in those, we've got a website, and it's www.revelationtoday.com.au. And that'll give us more information on those meetings and the chance to register.
Okay, so that website again, revelationtoday.com.au. Well, that sounds fantastic. Now, the series of lectures is called Revelation Today. Does that mean there's a particular focus on the biblical book of Revelation, or does it go broader than that?
Well, we're really talking about the future and finding hope for the future and discovering meaning and purpose in life. And so we're trying to get a revelation not only from the book but also of Jesus. And we're going to be talking about varied topics. But look, I think you'll really enjoy it. And if you check out that website, it'll show you a little bit more about the speakers.
Okay. And
all the information you need.
Okay, these are free events, yeah?
Absolutely, there's no charge.
Yep, but I seem to recall a register button on the website. You're wanting people to
absolutely
to register, so you know how many to expect, I guess.
When you get to the website, scroll down a little way. It'll give you the session information and some of the key topics we'll be covering, some information about the speakers, and then there's just a couple of things you can write in, which will basically put you on a list, and we can send out some information as we get closer to the date.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that's coming up in May. revelationtoday.com.au if you want to know more. Hey, thanks so much, Justin, for your time today.
Thank you, Cam.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.